The night was supposed to be a celebration, a rare moment when Michael Carter's family gathered under one roof, the dining room glowing with the soft light of birthday candles and the gentle clink of glasses. Laughter and music filled the air, and for a fleeting moment, Michael allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the old warmth could return. But as the cake was brought out and the guests raised their voices in song, a sudden crash shattered the illusion. A wine glass exploded against the far wall, red liquid streaking down the paint like a wound. The room fell silent, every eye turning to Ethan, Michael's only son, whose face was twisted with anger and something deeper, resentment that had been simmering for years. "This is what you deserve for always judging me," Ethan shouted, his voice echoing off the walls, raw and unfiltered. The words hung in the air, heavy and humiliating. Jessica, Michael's daughter-in-law, just laughed, her tone dismissive as she waved off the stunned guests. "Let him get it out of his system," she said, smirking, as if Michael's pain was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Michael sat quietly at the head of the table, his heart pounding, the humiliation burning deeper than the wine soaking into the carpet. He looked around at the faces of friends and family, some shocked, some embarrassed, some already pretending not to notice. No one came to his defense. No one told Ethan to stop. The party dissolved into awkward whispers and hasty goodbyes, the warmth replaced by a chill that settled into Michael's bones. As he knelt to pick up the shards of glass, his hands trembling, he realized this was more than a bad night. It was the final straw in a long line of disappointments, a lifetime of sacrifices met with scorn and indifference. He remembered the years he'd spent working overtime to pay for Ethan's college, the quiet ways he had tried to help, the advice that was always met with rolled eyes and sighs. He remembered the growing distance, the way Ethan and Jessica had slowly pushed him to the margins of his own life. As the last guest slipped out the door, Michael stood alone in the wreckage of his own birthday, the silence pressing in on him. He stared at the broken glass in his palm, the blood beading on his fingertip, and felt something inside him shift. He would not beg for respect. He would not plead for love. That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Michael made a silent decision, one that would change everything by morning. He would do what no one expected. And by 9:30 the next morning, when Ethan and Jessica finally realized what had happened, it would already be too late. The house was eerily quiet after the last car pulled away. The only sound, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Michael sat alone at the dining table, the remnants of his birthday cake untouched, the candles long since snuffed out. The air still carried the sharp tang of spilled wine and the faint echo of Ethan's outburst, replaying in Michael's mind like a cruel refrain. He stared at the empty chair where his son had sat, the memory of Ethan's twisted expression and Jessica's mocking laughter burning in his chest. For years, Michael had tried to bridge the growing gap between them, inviting them for Sunday dinners, offering help with bills, even babysitting at a moment's notice. Each gesture had been met with indifference, or worse, thinly veiled contempt. Tonight, the mask had finally slipped, and Michael saw the truth. He was no longer a father to be respected, but a target for their frustrations, a scapegoat for every disappointment they refused to own. The humiliation of the evening settled over him like a heavy blanket. But beneath the pain, something colder and stronger began to take root. He thought of all the times he'd stayed silent to keep the peace, all the times he'd swallowed his pride for the sake of family. He remembered the sacrifices, working double shifts to pay for Ethan's tuition, selling his prized coin collection to help with their down payment, quietly covering their debts when they fell behind. None of it had mattered. None of it had earned him the love or gratitude he'd hoped for. As the hours crept by, Michael's anger cooled into resolve. He realized that nothing he did would ever be enough for Ethan and Jessica, and that staying in this house, in this life, would only invite more pain. He stood and walked through the darkened rooms, touching the walls he had painted, the photos he had hung, the memories he had tried so hard to preserve. Each one felt like a goodbye. In the quiet of the night, Michael made a decision. He would not confront Ethan or Jessica. He would not beg for an apology or try to explain the hurt they had caused. Instead, he would reclaim his dignity in the only way left to him, by walking away. He began to plan, quietly and methodically, for a future where he was no longer at their mercy. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Michael felt a strange sense of peace. The man who had been wounded and underestimated was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone ready to take back control of his own story, no matter what it cost. And as he watched the sun rise over the empty street, Michael knew that tonight had changed everything, and that by morning the world would look very different. The house was still and silent, the kind of deep, heavy quiet that only comes in the hours before dawn. Michael moved through the familiar rooms with a calm, deliberate purpose, his footsteps muffled on the worn hardwood floors. He paused in the hallway, looking at the framed photos of Ethan as a child, smiling in a Little League uniform, blowing out birthday candles, hugging his mother on the front porch. Each image was a bittersweet reminder of the love and hope that had once filled this house, now replaced by resentment and distance. Michael's hands were steady as he packed a small overnight bag, a change of clothes, his medications, a folder of important documents he'd kept hidden in the back of his closet. He took his checkbook, his passport, and the keys to his old sedan, careful not to disturb the sleeping house. In the kitchen, he wrote a single note, his handwriting neat and unhurried. He placed it in an envelope and set it on the table, right where Ethan and Jessica would see it in the morning. The words were simple but final, a quiet explanation, a farewell, and a warning that things would never be the same. Michael glanced around the kitchen one last time, the memories of family dinners and laughter now tinged with sorrow. He slipped out the back door, locking it behind him, and walked to his car, the cool night air sharp against his skin. As he drove away, the city lights faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by the soft glow of a new day on the horizon. Michael felt a strange mix of grief and relief, the weight of years of disappointment finally lifting from his shoulders. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that he needed to start over somewhere he could breathe, somewhere he could remember who he was before he became a burden in his own home. He checked into a modest motel on the edge of town, paid in cash, and sat on the bed as the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains. For the first time in years, he felt free. Free from judgment, free from the constant ache of trying to please people who would never be satisfied. He made a list of things to do. Call his lawyer, close the joint accounts, update his will, and reach out to the friends he'd lost touch with over the years. Michael knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was done living for the approval of those who had only ever seen his flaws. As he drifted off to sleep, exhaustion finally overtaking him, Michael smiled to himself. He had done what no one expected. And by 9:30 the next morning, when Ethan and Jessica finally realized what had happened, it would already be too late. The morning sun crept through the kitchen window, casting long golden stripes across the floor and illuminating the quiet chaos left behind from the night before. Ethan stumbled in first, rubbing his eyes, expecting the usual smell of coffee and the sound of his father moving about the house. Instead, there was only silence and the faint, sour scent of spilled wine. Jessica followed, her hair tousled, her mood impatient as she scrolled through her phone. "Where's your dad?" she muttered, glancing at the empty coffee pot. Ethan shrugged, still half asleep, but as he moved to the table, his gaze landed on the envelope propped against the salt shaker. His name and Jessica's were written in Michael's careful script. "What's this?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Jessica rolled her eyes, but Ethan's hands shook as he tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The words were calm, direct, and devastating. Michael explained that after years of being judged, dismissed, and humiliated, even on his own birthday, he had decided to leave. He wrote of the pain he felt, the sacrifices he'd made, and the realization that nothing he did would ever be enough. He told them he was done being their scapegoat, done living in a house where he was only ever a target for their frustrations. He revealed that he had taken steps to protect his dignity and his assets. The joint accounts were closed, the will was changed, and his lawyer had instructions to contact them soon. "By the time you read this," the letter ended, "I will be gone. I hope someday you understand why." Ethan's face went pale, the words blurring as he read them again and again. Jessica snatched the letter from his hands, her bravado faltering as she realized the gravity of what Michael had done. "He's bluffing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Ethan rushed through the house, calling for his father, checking every room, every closet, every corner where Michael might have hidden. But the house was empty. The only trace of Michael the note and the echo of his absence. Panic set in as Ethan tried to call his father's phone, only to hear it ring from the drawer where Michael had left it behind. Jessica's frustration turned to fear as she realized the accounts were frozen, the credit cards declined, and the safety net they'd always relied on was gone. The reality of their isolation began to sink in, the house suddenly feeling colder, emptier, and far less secure. For the first time, Ethan and Jessica were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Not just the loss of Michael's support, but the loss of his presence, his forgiveness, and the quiet strength that had held their family together. As the clock struck 9:30, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in his hands, and understood that this time it really was too late. The letter sat on the kitchen table like a silent judge, its words echoing in every corner of the house as Ethan and Jessica scrambled to make sense of what had happened. Ethan's hands shook as he dialed Michael's number again, only to hear the hollow ring from the drawer where the phone had been left behind. Jessica paced the living room, her bravado from the night before replaced by a rising tide of anxiety. "He can't just leave," she muttered, but the truth was undeniable. The accounts were frozen, the credit cards declined, and the safety net they'd always taken for granted had vanished overnight. Ethan tried calling Michael's lawyer, but the receptionist's polite professional tone offered no comfort. "Mr. Carter has left instructions. You'll be contacted in due course." The words stung, a reminder that Michael had planned every detail with a precision they'd never expected. As the morning wore on, Ethan and Jessica's panic grew. They called friends and family, hoping someone had seen Michael or heard from him, but every lead was a dead end. The house, once filled with the noise and chaos of daily life, now felt like a mausoleum, silent, cold, and haunted by regret. Meanwhile, in a quiet motel room on the edge of town, Michael sat by the window, watching the world wake up. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the taste of freedom and the absence of judgment. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. He spent the morning making calls, closing joint accounts, updating his will, and arranging for his lawyer to deliver the necessary documents to Ethan and Jessica. He reached out to old friends, rekindling connections that had faded over time, and found comfort in their warmth and understanding. Michael walked through a nearby park, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the weight of years of disappointment finally lift from his shoulders. He realized that it was not defined by Ethan's anger or Jessica's contempt, but by his own choices, his own resilience. The pain of leaving his home was real, but it was nothing compared to the pain of staying. As the sun climbed higher, Michael allowed himself to hope for a future where he could be valued for who he was, not for what he could provide. Back at the house, Ethan and Jessica sat in stunned silence, the letter between them a constant reminder of what they had lost. For the first time, they were forced to confront the reality of their actions, their words, their choices, their failure to see the man who had given them everything. And as the day wore on, the truth became clear. Michael was gone, and this time, he wasn't coming back. The hours after Michael's disappearance stretched into a day, then two, and the panic that had first gripped Ethan and Jessica curdled into a gnawing, inescapable desperation. They scoured the house for clues, rifling through drawers and closets, searching for any sign of where Michael might have gone or how to reach him. Every familiar object, a faded photograph, a worn jacket, a set of keys, became a painful reminder of the man they had driven away. Jessica's frustration boiled over into anger, her voice sharp as she blamed Ethan for not apologizing, for not stopping his father from leaving. Ethan, in turn, lashed out, blaming Jessica for laughing at the party, for always encouraging the distance between him and his beaver. Their arguments echoed through the empty house, each accusation another crack in the fragile shell of their marriage. Meanwhile, Michael's absence became a topic of quiet gossip among friends and neighbors. Some called to check in, their voices tinged with concern and curiosity, but Ethan could only offer vague answers, unwilling to admit the truth. The lawyer's letter arrived 2 days later, its language formal and final. Michael had changed his will, closed all joint accounts, and left clear instructions that neither Ethan nor Jessica was to contact him directly. The house, the savings, and the family heirlooms were now out of reach, protected by legal walls they could not breach. The reality of their isolation settled over them like a heavy fog. The bills piled up, the fridge grew empty, and the silence became suffocating. For the first time, Ethan and Jessica were forced to confront the emptiness of their own lives. The absence of love, of respect, of the quiet strength that Michael had always provided. They tried to reach out to friends, but found themselves met with polite distance, their story already spreading through the community. Meanwhile, Michael was discovering a new world beyond the walls of his old life. He spent his days walking in the park, reading in the library, and reconnecting with friends who welcomed him with open arms. He joined a local community group where his kindness and wisdom were valued, and found joy in simple pleasures. A shared meal, a game of chess, a conversation that didn't end in judgment. Each day, Michael felt his spirit grow lighter, the wounds of the past slowly healing as he realized he was finally free. He was no longer a burden, no longer a scapegoat, but a man reclaiming his dignity and his right to happiness. And as the sun set on another day, Michael smiled to himself, knowing that he had done what no one expected. And that, for the first time in years, he was truly living for himself. Desperation finally pushed Ethan and Jessica into action. The house, once a fortress of routine and entitlement, now felt like a prison, every room echoing with Michael's absence. Ethan spent hours on the phone, calling old friends, distant relatives, even the local police, hoping for any clue to his father's whereabouts. Jessica scoured social media, searching for any sign that Michael had reached out to someone, but his digital trail was as empty as the house they now shared. Their search took them to Michael's favorite haunts: the coffee shop where he used to read the paper, the park where he'd walk in the mornings, the church where he'd once volunteered. Each place offered only sympathetic shrugs and gentle reminders of the man they'd lost. "He always spoke so kindly of you," the barista said, her eyes soft with pity. "I hope you find him." The words stung, a reminder that Michael had been valued by others in ways Ethan and Jessica had never understood. As the days passed, their frustration turned to fear. The lawyer's silence was impenetrable, and every attempt to reach Michael was met with polite, professional deflection. The community, once a source of comfort, now felt like a jury, quietly judging their every move. Meanwhile, Michael was thriving in his new world. He had found a small apartment in a lively neighborhood where neighbors greeted him by name and invited him to community dinners. He joined a book club where his insights were welcomed and volunteered at a local food pantry, where his steady hands and gentle humor made him a favorite among the staff. For the first time in years, Michael felt seen, not as a burden, but as a man with wisdom and kindness to share. He spent afternoons in the park, playing chess with new friends, and evenings sharing stories over home-cooked meals. The loneliness that had haunted him for so long was replaced by a quiet contentment, a sense of belonging that he had never found in his own home. He kept in touch with his lawyer, ensuring that his wishes were respected and that Ethan and Jessica could not undo the steps he had taken. Each day, Michael grew stronger, his confidence returning as he realized that he was not defined by the anger or neglect of others. He was at last the author of his own story. Back at the house, Ethan and Jessica's search grew more frantic, their arguments more bitter, as they faced the reality that Michael was gone, and that the life they had taken for granted was slipping away, one silent day at a time. The letter from Michael's lawyer arrived on a grey Thursday morning, its crisp envelope and official seal a stark contrast to the chaos that now reigned in Ethan and Jessica's home. Jessica tore it open with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the lines of legal language that spelled out the new reality. Michael's will had been rewritten. The house and all assets placed in a trust for charitable causes and longtime friends, and all joint accounts permanently closed. There would be no inheritance, no safety net, no last-minute reprieve. The lawyer's tone was polite but unyielding, making it clear that Michael's wishes were final and legally airtight. Ethan's face went white as he read the letter, the words blurring as the truth finally settled in. "He really did it," he whispered, his voice hollow. Jessica tried to argue, to find a loophole, but every call to the lawyer's office was met with the same calm response. "Mr. Carter's instructions are clear. There is nothing more to discuss." The reality of their situation hit them like a tidal wave. The mortgage was now their responsibility, the bills mounting with no one to bail them out. The family heirlooms, Michael's watch, the antique desk, the photo albums, were gone, donated to people and places that had shown him kindness. The community, once a source of pride, now felt like a wall of silent witnesses, their sympathy tinged with judgment. Meanwhile, Michael's life blossomed in ways he had never imagined. He was invited to speak at the community center, sharing his story with others who had felt invisible or unappreciated. His wisdom and humor made him a mentor to younger men, and his kindness earned him a circle of friends who valued him for who he was, not what he could give. He found joy in small things, a neighbor's homemade pie, a child's laughter in the park, the satisfaction of helping someone in need. Each day, Michael felt his heart grow lighter, the wounds of the past healing as he built a new legacy, one rooted in respect and genuine connection. He never gloated over Ethan and Jessica's downfall, but he did not regret his decision. He had given them every chance, every kindness, and in the end, he had chosen himself. As the sun set on another peaceful evening, Michael sat on his porch, surrounded by friends, and felt a quiet triumph. He had reclaimed his dignity, his peace, and his future. Back at the house, Ethan and Jessica sat in silence, the lawyer's letter between them, finally forced to confront the consequences of their actions, and the reality that, this time, there was no one left to blame but themselves. The fallout from Michael's departure rippled far beyond the walls of his old house. Word spread quickly through the family and the community, and soon Ethan and Jessica found themselves at the center of a storm they could neither control nor escape. Relatives who had once envied their comfortable life now called with pointed questions, their voices laced with disappointment and disbelief. "How could you let it come to this?" Michael's sister demanded, her words sharp as glass. Old friends stopped inviting them to gatherings, neighbors offered only tight smiles and awkward silences, and even Jessica's parents, who had always defended her, expressed quiet shame. The next family gathering was a tense affair, with Ethan and Jessica forced to explain Michael's absence and the truth behind the letter that had changed everything. There was no way to hide the facts. The birthday outburst, the years of neglect, the final devastating note. The room was thick with judgment, and for the first time, Ethan felt the full weight of his actions. Not just the loss of his father's support, but the loss of his respect, his forgiveness, and the quiet pride that had once defined their family. Jessica, too, was forced to confront the reality of her choices, her laughter at Michael's pain now echoing in her mind as a source of shame. Meanwhile, Michael's new life was filled with a sense of peace and belonging he had never known. He celebrated his next birthday, surrounded by friends who valued him, their laughter genuine, their affection freely given. The community center threw him a surprise party, complete with a homemade cake and a chorus of voices singing his name. Michael's heart swelled with gratitude as he looked around the room, realizing that he had finally found the family he deserved. Not bound by blood, but by kindness, respect, and shared joy. He kept in touch with a few relatives who had always treated him well, sending letters and photos that spoke of his happiness and his newfound freedom. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer defined him. He had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged not just unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. As the evening drew to a close, Michael stood to thank his friends, his voice steady and full of hope. "We can't choose the family we're born into," he said, "but we can choose the people we surround ourselves with. Thank you for being my family." The applause was warm and sincere, and as Michael blew out the candles on his cake, he made a wish, not for revenge, but for continued peace and the courage to keep living on his own terms. Back in his old house, Ethan and Jessica sat in the quiet, the echoes of their choices all around them, finally understanding that some losses can never be undone, and that the greatest reckoning is the one that comes from within. A year had passed since the night of the broken glass, and Michael Carter's life had become something he never could have imagined in the shadow of that humiliation. The pain of Ethan's outburst and Jessica's laughter had faded, replaced by the gentle rhythms of a life lived on his own terms. Michael's days were filled with purpose and connection. He volunteered at the community center, where his wisdom and patience made him a mentor to many. He spent afternoons in the park, reading to children and playing chess with old friends, his laughter ringing out beneath the trees. The small apartment he now called home was bright and welcoming, its walls lined with photos of new friends and handwritten notes of gratitude from those he'd helped. On his birthday, the community gathered to celebrate him, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. There were no angry words, no judgment, only warmth and the kind of laughter that heals old wounds. Michael stood at the center of it all, a quiet pride in his eyes, knowing that he had reclaimed his dignity and built a new family from the ashes of the old. He thought of Ethan and Jessica sometimes, wondered if they had learned anything from the emptiness that followed his departure. He hoped they had found a way to fill the void, not with money or comfort, but with humility and the courage to change. He bore them no ill will, but he no longer waited for their calls or longed for their approval. His heart was lighter, his spirit unburdened by the weight of unmet expectations. As the sun set on his birthday, Michael raised a glass to the friends who had become his true family, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to the people who remind us that it's never too late to choose happiness." The applause was gentle but heartfelt, and as Michael looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight, he felt a peace deeper than any he had ever known. His story was not one of revenge, but of renewal, a testament to the power of self-respect, resilience, and the quiet joy of living well. And as the stars appeared overhead, Michael knew that, in the end, the greatest victory was not in what he had lost, but in all that he had found.